Hi, my name's Amir, and this is Why'd You Do That pf2e. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is my favorite tabletop role-playing game. It might be my forever game, and on this channel, I want to go into the rules of the game, try and understand why it does what it does, and what that can mean for a fun game for you and your friends. But before all that, to be able to try and understand why the game does what it does, we have to first understand what it's trying to do in the first place. To put it another way, before we can answer why'd you do that pf2e, we have to ask, why even are you pf2e? So I've come up with what I feel are the design goals of the game, and I'm going to be using these as a guide to see how well the rules of the game achieve them in the rest of this video series, for however long it lasts, inshallah. These design goals are: Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a tabletop role-playing game that aims to tell a high fantasy story of a game of diverse heroes with unique powers who have to work together to overcome formidable foes in tactical combat and other challenging encounters, finding wondrous items they need to use along the way, and growing in power from being competent adventurers at the start to near demigods by the end. If all of that sounds good to you, then Pathfinder 2nd Edition might be the perfect game for you. In this video, I want to go into each of those design goals to see what it means for how the game plays and feels. First up is high fantasy. High fantasy is the most common genre of fantasy, and it really started with Lord of the Rings, which remains one of the best examples of it. It takes place in a world with not much technology. So for example, people fight with swords and shields rather than guns, but has a lot of magic. It can also mean a lot of non-intelligent human species existing in the world, mostly taken from mythology. Creatures like elves and dwarves. These elements make stories set in high fantasy feel very different from stories set in low fantasy or no fantasy world. Basically, in high fantasy stories, magic can solve a lot of otherwise insurmountable problems and cause them. Pathfinder 2nd Edition very much creates a high fantasy world. It achieves this by having a lot of rules about magic and having a lot of magical options for both players and GM. There's magical beasts and creatures, the ability to cast a lot of magic spells, and a lot of magic items and weapons to use. Speaking of options, let's talk about the next design element: diverse heroes with unique power. This is in many ways the defining aspect of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the way it allows you to create truly unique characters that can impact the world in very unique ways. It achieves this by having masses and masses of character options. Even at level 1, you have a lot of options to choose from, and the unique set of options that you choose for your character creates the unique hero. These options do two things. First, they define very different origins that you can create for your character. The character you create can be inspired by Western mythology, East Asian mythology, South Asian, or African mythology, or be from fantastical places that have no real-world analog. The second thing they do is they provide different mechanical impacts on the game. Each option actually does something very different in the game. This is what allows you to, for example, create two Elven Rangers and have them feel very different from each other based on the different Elven or Ranger options that you pick. And these different powers and abilities really matter when it comes to have to work together to overcome formidable foes and other challenging encounters. This game is meant to tell a compelling story, and you can't have a compelling story without meaningful conflict and real stakes. This means the game expects game masters to create encounters for players with real consequences, up to and including death, or worse. These situations are also meant to provide unique challenges that cannot be overcome by one character with one set of powers and abilities. The group is expected to work together and with their combined strengths overcome the challenges. You cannot create a character that can do everything by themselves. Now, a lot of these challenges are going to be in tactical combat. The game expects you to play on a grid, which allows things like difficult terrain, area of effect, and positioning to come into play. A lot of the unique powers we talked about earlier are focused around dealing with these tactical elements in interesting ways. Other interesting choices come from wondrous items they need to use. Items are not optional in this game. The game expects characters, even at first level, to be equipped with appropriate weapons and other items to deal with challenges. As the game progresses, the game expects characters to find more and more powerful items to deal with the growing challenges. This game definitely has a loot chase element, and that leads to grow in power from being competent to near demigods. Pathfinder 2nd Edition has a steep power curve. It's a level-based game. It goes from level 1 to level 20, and it uses each and every one of them. Even at level 1, starting characters have chosen options that make them cut above the regular folk. But each level provides more options and more power. So by level 20, they will be near demigods. They will be demigods because the game expects you to be fighting demigods pretty much by the game's end. And the interesting thing is that this also provides a very definite cap. Pathfinder 2nd Edition does not expect you to be fighting gods. This also means that it is very hard for lower level player characters to beat higher level creatures, and vice versa. In fact, it becomes impossible pretty quickly with a large level spread. This is a game in which an ancient red dragon cannot be beaten by 100 low-level fighters and wizards and clerics. High-level threats require high-level adventurers, and this steep power curve also emphasizes the high fantasy feeling of the game. Now, can you modify these different elements? Can you use Pathfinder 2nd Edition to play a low or no fantasy game with characters who start out average and stay average throughout the campaign? Sure, and I would argue that Pathfinder 2nd Edition's rules are so well thought out and so modular that you can quite easily modify the game to fit a lot of different themes and settings. In the end, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is set up to tell adventure stories. Stories in which a small group of heroes can band together, travel through a fantastical world, and really make a meaningful difference in the world based on their own efforts. And I feel it does that very well. But to delve into that, we're going to have to start going into the rules. Now, I do think there's one more intro video to do before I start going into the actual rules of the game itself, so I hope you'll join me for that as well. I really appreciate you making it to the end of this video. Like, comment, and subscribe, and inshallah, I'll see you in the next one.